Welcome, my name is Giovanni Ferrante from SIPS, and I'm joined today by Bran Gray, General Manager Procurement Food at Foodbuy Australia. We will be talking about engagement with small and medium enterprises, a fundamental element of economic recovery, particularly in this post-pandemic world. The aim of the session is to understand how organizations can generate opportunities for SMEs and eliminate barrier to engagement, as well as understanding while working with SME, how you can reduce your risk profile of doing business with them. So thank you and welcome, Bran. Delighted to have you here on board with us today.
Thanks, Gio.
Okay, Bran, if you'd like to briefly introduce yourself and the organization you work for, just highlighting how procurement operates at a high level, how it's structured and what its main purpose is.
My name is Brent Gray. I'm the General Manager for Procurement for the food portfolio for Foodbuy Australia, which is the food and hospitality procurement division for Compass Group Australia, the largest food and support services organisation in the country. We work alongside Compass Group and a suite of additional clients across the hospitality industry. The structure of the procurement team inside Foodbuy is that it sits as a wholly owned subsidiary of Compass Group. And effectively manages the supply chain function, the procurement function for Compass Group, whilst also having an external market-facing operation. So we also provide strategic outsourced procurement solutions in the hospitality industry to external clients outside of Compass Group.
Brilliant. Now, how would you approach the SME engagement piece as a procurement team? What's the purpose of procurement in engaging SMEs?
I think the purpose of procurement is to, certainly within our business, is to make sure that we operate on a level playing field and we don't intimidate SMEs in working with us at scale, or even not at scale, just engaging with Foodbuy, which has a sizable portfolio. The barriers to entry, we like to ensure that they're relatively low. We're always looking to the market through different channels to find SMEs in the marketplace that fit the customer requirements and the client requirements in the different sectors that we work through. So as a sectorized business, the verticals that we operate through include channels like education, business and industry, offshore and remote, defense, and the clients within those have the same values, aspirations, and strategies that we have as a procurement function. And they include things like local engagement, Indigenous engagement, and the development of opportunities for those SMEs. And some of those channels include public sector clients. So we're very aware of the way in which they like us to set those targets by state, by category, the federally published targets that we know that the public sector has to commit to. And so we work in parallel with those sectors to ensure that the local engagement is as thorough as it needs to be without making it look like dealing with Compass Group or dealing with Foodbuy is on too large of a scale or too difficult or too cumbersome.
And that leads into the next questions that you briefly alluded to. Is there any legislation or guiding principle here in Australia that encourages or mandate business that want to work with SMEs and local suppliers?
Yeah, I think, yeah, you're right, Gio. So the legislative piece, I think for the public sector clients, there are federal targets and commitments in the areas in which we deal. So in all those cases where we have those contracts, we're always delighted to be able to bring our supply chain to the client and to develop great SME and regional partnership across the entire portfolio. So making sure that we deliver that on behalf of the client really just helps to tell the story of what their engagement strategy looks like and how Foodbuy has helped them to deliver it either through Compass Group or through their independent external business.
Brilliant. At the start, Bran, you mentioned that the purpose of procurement is to create a level playing field. So how do you ensure that your procurement processes don't discourage SME engagement or involvement or participation to your tender process, for example?
I think like any good procurement function, our framework in terms of how we engage with the market on any level is industry best practice. So we very actively seek the identification of SMEs and Indigenous and local suppliers to create that level playing field that we spoke about across the entire category portfolio. So that activity really takes shape in a number of different ways. But I think we're very active in the marketplace, certainly in the categories that we play in. The supply chain team are well known, and we always ensure that the approach to the category for the client, or the approach to the channel for the client, is done with a weighted scorecard approach that allows the engagement of SMEs on that level playing field to be more than just a pricing conversation or a credit terms conversation or any conversation in isolation. And that level playing field then feeds in to what the SMEs need in order to be able to thrive. So if you're taking some of the smaller businesses, and let's talk about the S, if you're talking to some of the smaller businesses in the market, where they struggle is to compete with the very large players in the same field, all things being equal. And in the areas that they struggle with, they typically cannot compete on a level playing field unless the scoring conversation is more akin to what the customer is actually looking for, as opposed to what a traditional or an old school purchasing function might have sought, which might have been best price in the market or credit payment terms. And we have found that engagement with those SMEs on those terms has been really fruitful for us, and we found it very, very beneficial.
That's very insightful. Thanks, Brent. In terms of sort of like the pre-awarding process or the pre-scoring process, have you made any significant change to your practices to sort of simplify the procurement process? We know sometimes is a big imposition for those kind of businesses to even allocate resources to bid for a tender, for example. Have you made any changes to the way you go to market to enable more of those small and medium enterprises to actually bid for it?
I think the benefit of being a private business in most cases is that we're flexible. Our procurement framework, which is the FPF, the Foodbuy Procurement Framework, does have flexibility built into it. So in the e-procurement platform, we've got that inbuilt flexibility across, full strategic events down to rapid sourcing events. But we also flex for customers who need us to engage on a more direct basis. And the SMEs that exist in the local sourcing portfolio, that's where that tends to fit. So that flexibility can extend into a conversation, a very open conversation, sometimes with our CFO around payment terms. It can mean a direct negotiation with some local suppliers, or just some engagement, literally walking the streets, Gio, in terms of finding that local engagement that a client might need, whether it's a mining client looking to ensure that they support a local community, or a defense base looking to ensure that they support local businesses as well. But that flexibility in the approach is both within the system and outside of the system in terms of how the procurement team goes about it. And we often talk about not really being able to buy from a desk when it comes to hospitality. You've got to get out amongst it and meet the producers, the farmers, the butchers and the fishmongers of the world. And we found that engagement, that local engagement, that real engagement on the ground has been something that sets us apart, I think, from a lot of players in the hospitality industry. The approach at the end of the awarding process that you talk about, where suppliers haven't been able to put a significant amount of resource on the back end, as a large player, we find that we have more than enough resource to be able to coach them through and bring them through the process with us, rather than impose a massive administrative burden on them. Our e-business teams will work with a supplier to onboard them to our ordering platform. Our finance teams will work with them to onboard them through our accounting platforms. So we utilize our internal size and scale to ensure that the small to medium enterprise business is brought on at a speed with which they're comfortable, and not, just impose this massive behemoth of administrative burden that you're right, most SMEs can't really contend with.
Thanks, Bran. From your experience, have you seen any particular category or business need that's worked very well in terms of procurement for SMEs in your business?
So it's interesting. So I wouldn't put it into a direct category per se, but I have always found that where the differentiation is needed in terms of either innovation, or we've got a critical requirement in the specification for local or innovative food hospitality, whether it's boutique or it might be some premium services, the SME I sometimes feel is better positioned and can be more agile in developing an offer and delivering on the requirements versus a larger business. So the advantages that SME do have in the marketplace sometimes can be their agility and the speed with which they can work, with which they can make a decision and commit and service and support that business. And so when you say if there's any categories where I think it's worked particularly well, I think where you've got a very clear set of local or innovative guidelines on what's required, the SME supporting that business, where you might represent 12, 15, 20% of their business in that area, is much more agile in that space, or can be much more agile in that space than a very large business where you might be less than 1%. That agility works to their advantage. They tend to be owner operated. The owner tends to be the MD and the CFO and the marketing director. And that agility really does work. And I think where we have found the benefit has been where we bring cross-functional team to the table, and it's a comfortable paced conversation where we achieve the procurement outcome, the financial outcome, the customer outcome ultimately, and we just take the time to let that that MD, CFO, and marketing director, who's all the same person inside an SME, to just slowly walk through that process with us. That's not a category, Gio, but it is an area where you're quite clearly defined in terms of your specification.
Oh, that's brilliant. And certainly, again, it wasn't just a category, it's this particular business need, which you've clearly outlined, when it's like more boutique or defined. So that's great. It's an angle that certainly we haven't thought about. In terms of how do you engage with SMEs, do you have like a particular portal or internal tools, or do you use the support of intermediaries to engage small and medium enterprises?
We do work with intermediaries. I mean, outside of the standard attendance of expos and trade fairs and any sort of SME market events that typically take place in each state, we do flex the approach based on the client. And so there's a number of channels that we use to communicate that we have opportunity within the business, within the portfolio. I mean, from the Indigenous engagement perspective, we talk to Supply Nation on an ongoing basis, and we're a founding member of that organization. We talk to Industry Capability Network, ICN, who you might be aware of, and they talk to us. They bring us to the table when it comes to state-based engagement and local opportunities. There is an element of literally trawling the market. So we have buyers and junior buyers or associate buyers who, as part of their initial learning process of working through our systems and learning our procurement framework, will spend a large amount of time trawling the networks and talking to chambers of commerce and yellow pages and Google searches to find categories, to populate category invitations to any size businesses to come and have a go at bidding for some of our business. And we award that way as well. So we can award nationally, we can award locally, we can split a state up into subsections and award in that way as well, into sectors if we need to. And always open to new areas, new ways to approach the market in that space as well.
It's great. In terms of supporting the development of SMEs, do you sort of provide any training or any forum that helps an SME grow or develop in any way?
I think it's something that we continue to investigate. The primary focus for us really has been to invest in our category teams and their ability to understand and search their respective markets, their portfolio ownership. And alongside that, I think we invest deeply and positively into the relationships that we already have with the suppliers that we do have. Recently, we partnered with AI Group and worked with their SME Entrepreneurs Program, which, if you're aware of that program, it connects a number of SMEs to the organization and the opportunity to gain federal investment funds in the continued development of their own businesses. So we obviously plan to continue to explore these programs with the help of the SMEs to be able to grow and compete in their respective markets, I should say, rather than just with Foodbuy. And we always look to encourage SMEs that we've engaged with to grow and develop outside of our business.
Great. In terms of the SMEs that you're engaged with, I'd imagine that there is a process in which you collect some feedback or you share some experiences. What would you say their biggest challenge is in terms of supporting your procurement goals, which often, I'd imagine, if it's like any business, might be around the saving side as well?
I think every supply relationship has to be founded on respect and trust, and the ability for the buyer and the seller to really deeply understand each other's businesses. I think at Foodbuy, we really do that. We always ensure that we're not just educating the seller about Foodbuy, but we really do want to understand what their business looks like. So, we have that approach of that initial engagement is tell me about me, tell me about you, tell me about me and you. In other words, what do you know about Compass Group? And let me talk to you about that. And what do you know about Foodbuy? And let me talk to you about that. I'm really keen to understand your business. Once we've done that, now let's talk about the potential for what you and I look like, or me and you, if you get the saying. The opportunity ahead for both has to be clear. So we have to be very honest and upfront about what the opportunity is, and crucially as well, within the portfolio, what it isn't. So we don't want to be ambiguous in that regard. And I think the challenge that we have, for whatever reason, the reason that we're out to market, the reason that we're looking for this solution, so we're upfront on that. And then the expectation versus the capability. So what the buyer or the category manager within the team expects to see, and we pair that off against what does the actual capability of that vendor look like? Are we reaching too far? Are we very clear that we expect, state-based logistics and total geographical coverage versus a local business in a region that just could never achieve that realistically? I think those limitations, once we know what they are, the conversation runs much more smoothly. So that supports the larger business with the procurement goals, in that we're very clear about what the capability is and isn't. I think the SMEs do play a vital role in giving that flexibility that we spoke about earlier, that agility to be able to make a solution happen quite quickly without layers and layers of bureaucracy, typically. And I think that the crucial part for the ongoing larger business procurement goals is that rather than having a one-time use or a one-off use with an SME, we've taken a view that the sustainable growth mindset with a small vendor or a medium vendor over the medium term is much more beneficial to both parties. And if I can give you an example of that, the larger procurement goal might be better supported by delivering an SME growth outcome of 5 to 10% every year for 5 years, rather than giving them 50% 1 year and then going flat, and then potentially they fail and you have to step away a little bit. That incremental baby step, I find, definitely works. That mentality, that approach, and sometimes you have to restrain the SME, or sorry, I shouldn't say that. You have to restrain your own ambitions in terms of where you'd like them to be, because everyone wants to double their business overnight. That approach reaps the most reward for both parties, because when you get to the end of the 3-year term or the 5-year term, you've got a really well constructed trading relationship with a fabulous foundation, a trusted supplier who really does believe that when you say you're going to deliver on the growth, that you deliver on the growth in an incremental way.
Brilliant. You work with a number of small and medium businesses. Is there any challenge that they face that keeps coming up, or that that the SMEs brings to you, and that's recurring, or it's common across some of the organizations that you work with?
The challenges that the challenges that the SMEs face?
Yeah, the SMEs. Is there any common challenges that you've come across as a barrier, or something that the SME actually struggles with in dealing with your organization?
I think when it comes to Foodbuy and the larger portfolio, in the competitive landscape, I typically find that it can be as simple as pricing and payment terms. And I'll just elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah.
In every portfolio, there are SMEs, and in every portfolio, there are major players and players who have significant market share. And so from both a pricing and a margin perspective, and sometimes capability, but we spoke about addressing the local capability piece, the ability for the SME to compete on pricing and terms can be really, really difficult. And I think the approach in that regard has to be the weighted scorecard, the view on what the actual benefit to the customer is by having something that's maybe priced a certain way. But equally, with our scale, we can come to the table with real solutions on the payment terms piece, which gives genuine support to local businesses. And that flexibility on the payment terms is especially important. So we've done some work with our executive director, Andy Brightmore, and our CFO on ensuring that where we do engage with those SMEs and they're working in a similar vertical or a similar channel to a major player, we might take a view that the Foodbuy or the Compass Group working capital or the cash flow in the business can flex to support that small to medium enterprise. And it's crucial that we do, because the impact to Compass Group can be negligible in terms of the cash flow piece, but actually the trust and the relationship that you end up building and the advocacy that you get in return from that supplier by supporting them in that way is phenomenal. You might have a vendor who's struggling to compete in the marketplace, who represents one of 5 vendors in their area. And were they to compete on a level playing field completely, and I mean that in the most true sense of the competitive landscape, price and margin, they would never win out, ever, unless 20 years down the line, they were at a similar scale. And so the onus is on us to come to the table and say, okay, we understand on this particular element, that's where you find the difficulty. What can we do to better support you so that you can grow and develop with us and alongside us? And we will take into consideration these 2 elements in a meaningful way. So it's not just an automated output of a procurement process, but actually a deep and meaningful conversation with our exec around, we really want to support this business. This is a local engagement piece. This SME provides a service or some innovation that is truly unique to the marketplace. And let's have that conversation.
That's really important, Bran. You've touched on a number of really good points. As I mentioned at the start, especially coming out of this pandemic, those kind of approaches with SMEs can determine not only the survival of those very businesses, but also the way they behave and they move forward. You've made a connection between the effort that you make, which for you has very low impact on your cash flow, which is actually vital for the SME to survive and to stay in business. And that could be a very fundamental element of economic recovery, as many businesses, especially those on a smaller turnover, are struggling or fighting for cash flow. This is something we've seen on a global level ourselves. For example, in the UK, the government has pledged to reduce the payment terms to all of its suppliers from whatever 60 days. I think throughout the pandemic, the payment terms have been brought back to 2 weeks. So this really helps making significant difference. And for businesses of that size, having a payment coming 45 ahead of what they expected is actually vital. Brent, if you had to describe, if you have to pick one benefit of working with an SME, what would that be?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Feel free, not limited to one, but you can pick your favorite and then describe some of the other benefits that you see.
So we touched already on the agility piece, and I think SMEs who may not be able to compete on that landscape in terms of price and credit, if you like, all things being equal, they offset that disadvantage with the agility and the access to innovation, or certainly the way they go about seeking and bringing innovation to the marketplace. That innovation path is exciting in an SME. It tends to be very agile, very quick, and light of foot, if that sort of makes sense. And they're always open to variations from traditional ways of working. So when we make suggestions about how we might speed up a process to bring something to market, if we decide that we might have a slightly different approach to something that could really bring them a significant benefit, they're more open to it. And I think the conversation we had about the MD being the CFO and the marketing director as well, it's an easier conversation, and that entrepreneurial spirit inside the SME leads to quick decision making. So you can come up with an idea, and from ideation to implementation can be a much shorter timeline once you kind of nut out the details. And I could think of a dozen examples, especially during COVID, where we ourselves were challenged with just being light of foot and coming up with quick solutions and quick ideas. Failing fast is kind of easier to do with an SME. We have this idea, let's mobilize it. That wasn't fabulously well received. Let's just fail fast, and nobody really comes out. That, to me, that is generally the one thing that I enjoy about working with SMEs. So that route to decision making is key. The investment conversation is typically a single point. It might be just one or two people that you have to have a conversation with. And there's certainly an ability to create a shared vision. So I've always found that when you sit down with an SME and you've gotten through the initial trust conversations, and if you're new to them and they're new to you, and you create that shared vision, they're very energetic and enthusiastic about wanting to make sure that the ball keeps rolling on that shared vision. And I think, given the nature of our business, especially just how diverse it is, the team, the procurement team, and the wider Foodbuy team, which is a large group, they do get a very deep sense of accomplishment in supporting and developing the growth and the success of the SMEs. So they love to shout about the SME engagement that delivered X, Y, and Z, and potentially, return some funds back to a local community in some way, shape, or form, whether that's local engagement or Indigenous engagement or however it comes about. So that sense of accomplishment for me is key in keeping a really high performing procurement team engaged and enthusiastic about what we're doing. That relationship across all levels, so the buyer and the seller in that relationship, is really dynamic. It's quite exciting to see the way the buyers and the category managers engage with the seller from an SME versus the very structured, time-honored traditional way of dealing with very large-scale businesses, which is multi-tiered in terms of the bureaucracy and the levels of management, the people that you have to engage with, and completely right to do it in that way, because we're talking about considerable scale. Mm-hmm. The enthusiasm and the excitement, not that it doesn't come from that large scale engagement, it absolutely does, but on an SME, it's much more exciting and dynamic and free flowing, especially on when you're doing ideation sessions.
Yeah, that's very true. I was in a webinar last week, and someone was describing this dynamic as very refreshing, because they were comparing the sort of the traditional approach of a large organization versus an SME to supplier relationship, and the hunger and the thrive that an SME has to meet customer expectation and exceed those was absolutely phenomenal. So I absolutely agree with you. This is a really important aspect, and certainly a key benefit of that relationship with smaller enterprises. Bran, what's your particular view on SMEs engagement be a key element for economic recovery? You know, we've seen the situation here in Australia with, you know, the country in big need to support from hospitality business, which is, you know, the one that you guys are in this industry you operate within, to a number of other industries that are struggling. Do you see engagement of SMEs as a potential solution, or not an entire solution, but something that can support economic recovery?
Absolutely. I absolutely agree that the SME has to be there as a fundamental foundation for that recovery program. I think the commitment that we have across, you know, the regional, the local SME, the indigenous SME, supply chain and supplier piece, we've completely undeterred by COVID. So I don't think it's had an impact on that at all. If anything, actually, I do think our SME vendors have really played a pivotal role with us in seeing us through it. We really did rely on them a lot to ensure, in some cases, some very important cases, continuity of supply on a local level, to specific clients and new clients who came to us in an emergency situation, certainly over and above their contractual agreements with Foodbuy and with our client base. There was a lot of flexibility, and that agile thinking and that agile approach to trade really came to the fore during COVID, because we needed local support, quick decision making, the ability to turn something around that maybe wasn't contracted or wasn't properly priced, or, you know, just that flexibility. And I think COVID is interesting because it's further highlighted the opportunity and responsibility that we have as a larger player to support the SMEs in being flexible to support them to work through a really tough economic environment. And I think I could put my hand on heart and say that if you spoke to some of our SME providers, I would hope that they would say that, you know, Foodbuy and Compass did come to the fore and did come to the table when the time was needed to help them through. We absolutely will use the existing relationships we have and the new insights we've gained through COVID to continue to drive forward in the area. And I've no doubt that new and exciting SME, at-sea, local supplier engagements, that they lie ahead of us. They play and they continue to play a really core component of the national supply chain capability. They're fundamental to the recovery. I truly believe that. And they're fundamental to our proposition to our clients, all of our clients. So yes, no, I absolutely think that they will be instrumental in supporting the recovery process.
Brent, thank you very much. This has been a very insightful conversation. Can I just ask you to leave us with one final remark? If you had to give any advice to organizations out there looking to engage with SMEs, what would that advice be?
Oh, final thought, Gio. I think my thought with SMEs, especially to anyone looking after a significant procurement team or a portfolio, is what I found they need the most is that you just invest some time. If you can find the time to invest your personal time at a very senior level, the engagement, the traction, the enthusiasm that you will get in return for bringing senior people in your business to the table to engage, coach, develop, incubate, really help those businesses grow. The return on that investment of your time is more than, you know, tenfold the time that you would have invested. And I understand that everybody's busy and everybody has a lot of requests for their time. But carving time out of your diary to go and see those vendors and bring a senior person to the table is you know, for me, absolutely the best investment you can make with SMEs.
That's a brilliant advice, and certainly one that takes the lens of the short-term gain for a much more strategic approach to your business first, because you mentioned, you know, the energy and the outcomes that could be generated by that engagement on the longer term, much more significant, but also helps, you know, as we said, you know, economic development and empowerment of organizations that are thriving and are looking for opportunities. Bran, I'd like to thank you immensely for sharing your insight with us. It's been a steep learning curve. Congratulations to all of the amazing work that you and Foodbuy are doing in engaging SMEs. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed sharing your insight with us as well.
I have, Gia. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for having me on.